all of us who dream of full citizenship rights guaranteed by the American Constitution. Welcome, 欢迎,欢迎,欢迎 in Mandarin, my dialect of Mandarin. I am Wing Chin Foo, Wong Chin Foo. What a joy it is to be gathered here in this beautiful area of Saratoga with my fellow lovers of liberty. And yet our liberties are under threat. And I declare here and now that this election year of 1896 will go down in history, spurred by this meeting of hearts and minds to start a new chapter in our American history, in this land that we call our home. But before I dive too deeply into the politics of our time, I want to celebrate the beauty of your illustrious area. 25,000 Chinese came to Saratoga in the 1840s during the gold rush. That's right. And some of you or your ancestors even built the Saratoga and Pescadero Turnpike in the 1870s, helping to industrialize this area and the whole nation. And in nearby San Jose, there was a Chinatown built just 30 years ago. Some of you may have forgotten, but I haven't. Yes, there was that Chinatown before the founding of Highlandville's Chinatown in 1887. It's an honor to witness the Chinatowns of our people, the Tong Yan Gai, bustling with businesses of all sorts, people eating and shopping, and Hakka barber shops, tea houses, Chinese herbalists, the temples, and even some of you ladies and children were born here. I mean, what a privilege to be born here. Like many of you, I was born in China, in Shantung province, Shandong or Shandong in my Mandarin dialect. I was and always will be a proud Chinese American. Thank you, and so are you. I was naturalized in Grand Rapids, Michigan in 1874. That's why I called the newspaper that I published in 1883 the Chinese American, to represent my naturalization and to declare that we can be who we are and be Americans. Chinese Americans are the unsung heroes of America, along with many other disenfranchised people, including our sisters here today, who have helped to build this nation, but often have no voice, no vote. Some of you here today are builders of the great transcontinental railroad. You, along with your fathers, brothers, even your grandfathers, that engineering marvel that joined America's east and west coasts. More than 15,000 Chinese were invited here by the Central Pacific Railroad with the promise of great wealth and freedom to pursue life, liberty, and happiness. So were the Europeans, who were paid more and given full citizenship rights without question. When the Transcontinental Railroad was completed, remember that famous photograph of the Golden Spike ceremony with all those railroad workers in it? Were any of you or your father's brothers friends in that photo? No. But they were indeed present. But where? Hidden away in a railroad wagon. Out of tremendous gratitude, the bosses threw the Chinese workers a party to thank them for sacrificing their lives and taking less pay than the Europeans to help to make the bosses and the shareholders even wealthier than they would have been. I know. They thought that the Chinese cared more about food than being in a photograph. I mean, we all love food. We love to eat, right? Yeah. But who can blame them, right? What's a photograph anyway? It's just a face. Uh, and who cares about face anyway? We do. We have lost face. We have been given no face in America's history. After all our hard work to build a nation, after all the sacrifices we have made of our lives, of being separated from our families and loved ones for years, of being used and taunted and harassed, we were not acknowledged or given due respect. 嗰啲死鬼佬一啲面都唔俾我哋。We were not given credit for our good deeds. And when the economy tanked in the 1870s, and now, who do they blame? That's right. You, us. We become the yellow peril, blamed for stealing jobs, blamed for spreading diseases, blamed for peddling opium, which, by the way, was thrust upon China at the points of Christian bayonets. And yet Americans wonder why so many of us are heathens. The yellow peril, an invention of this government which has spread lies, misinformation, and fictitious facts about us. How do those lies affect us? How many times have you had your queues pulled by kids calling you a rat or Ching Chong Chinaman? How many times have you passed by seedy-looking men muttering curses at you or to your face, telling you to go back to China? Just last week, a politician accused us of eating rats and cats and dogs. As I've said time and time again, I never knew that these cute furry little animals were good to eat until Americans told me about it. What? We eat poodles with noodles? Sesame kitten and fried mice? For 20 years, I have offered, and I still offer right now, $500 to anyone who could prove that we eat our neighbor's pets. Any takers? No. No one has ever furnished any proof that we do that. They're all lies. For decades, I've traveled across the country to give lectures. I've published newspapers. I've written prolifically in major newspapers and popular magazines to educate Americans about who we truly are. 3 years ago, I even started the first Chinese theater on the East Coast in New York's Chinatown to show Americans true Chinese culture. Not that ching chong, you know what I mean, wishy-washy, chop, 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 that we saw in Mark Twain's play about a Chinese servant called Ah Sin, played by Charles Parslow, a white man famous for doing that. Thankfully, that was a flop. I've done all this to let Americans know that we are just regular human beings like everybody else. We are not the enemy, yet the attacks on us have resurged thanks to the lies, distortions, and delusional rantings of politicians and demagogues. We're harassed daily, assaulted, and systematically being driven out of our communities in Seattle and Tacoma, Washington, Pacific Grove in California. Members of our community have been lynched in Los Angeles, Chinatown, lynched in Rock Creek, Wyoming, Hell's Canyon, Oregon, Denver, Colorado. More than 150 anti-Chinese riots have swept throughout the American West in just the last 26 years. Our government is promoting and protecting the erasure of Chinese and Chinese Americans. Don't you believe me? How many of you have heard of Tacoma, Truckee, California? Some of you, yes, you've been there, and some of you might have even worked there, blasting tunnels through the mountains to build the Transcontinental Railroad. Well, that Chinatown was second in size only to San Francisco's. But 10 years ago, your California state legislator, Charles McGlashan, led a boycott of all Chinese businesses and all white-owned businesses that employed Chinese. A mob burned down Truckee's Chinatown and drove every single Chinese out of town. That so-called Truckee method was so successful that many other cities have adopted this method to wipe us out. You recall the first San Jose Chinatown that I mentioned? Founded in 1866, a thriving neighborhood of businesses and residents, thriving so much, in fact, that it was deemed too valuable to be wasted on the Chinese. Oh, yes. San Jose declared Chinatown a public nuisance. It condemned all the Chinese laundries there. Mysterious fires burned down the neighborhood. Residents rebuilt it, but it was burned down again, and again, and again, and again, until, for the fifth time, in May 4th, 1887, a blaze swallowed up San Jose Chinatown for good. Residents had set up a water brigade, but somehow the water tanks were empty. And just 2 weeks before that, prominent white business owners in Chinatown just happened to add a lot more coverage to their fire insurance policies. Very good business sense. But our brave brothers refused to leave. They refused to give up. Enterprising people like Yong Wah-Kok, who moved here from Canton in 1881, set up a grocery store. He became a community leader. Now he's raising funds to help a brilliant young doctor that we all should be supporting, the patriotic doctor Sun Yat-sen, Sun Zong-san, to overthrow the Manchu dynasty and set up a democratic Chinese republic led by a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. Mr. Yong Wah-Kok is here today with his proud Chinese American family. Let us acknowledge them for their fighting spirit and love of our country. And in nearby San Francisco, bigots also threatened to wipe us out. It was almost 20 years ago. Some of you may remember July 1877, the riots, the pogrom against the Chinese. For 3 days and 3 nights, mobs targeted Chinese homes and businesses. Houses were burnt, looted, thanks to demagogues like Dennis Carney, whose mission it is to eradicate Chinese from the continent. When Dennis Carney went to New York in 1883, I wrote him a letter. I challenged him to a debate. I signed it contemptuously, Wong Chin Foo, editor, Chinese American. I told reporters, I gave them this letter. It made headlines for days. I told reporters, I shall drive him back to his sandlots with his tail between his legs. Carney was too chicken. But finally, 4 years later, we faced off at the New York Herald offices. I understand, Mr. Carney, that you're against all Chinamen and that you're here in New York to fight them. I'm against them because they're all brought here on contract. That's not true. Can you show me one Chinaman that was brought here on contract? They all are. I wasn't brought here on contract. I'm an American citizen. The federal rulings are against that. They are not. I'm an American citizen, and I voted for the good old Democratic ticket and sometimes for a good Republican. Chinamen must be admitted to citizenship, as I was 15 years ago, by the provisions of the constitutions of our forefathers, and yet your forefathers? You can't call the framers of the Constitution your forefathers. You eat rats. You Irish eat worse things than rats. Why, I'll throw you out of the window. That's all these bullies know how to do. Call people names and threaten violence when they lose an argument. Newspapers around the country declared me the winner. The New York Sun called me a Chinese foeman worthy of his steel. That I assumed the offensive in a fashion that no Chinaman in this country has yet equaled. But I wasn't done yet. That same evening, Carney held a rally at a half-empty hall in Cooper Union, which he rented. My buddies and I showed up in our Sunday best, sat in the front row, and heckled him. Shut up, Carney McBlaney. Take your paddy boat and go back to where you came from. I am not to be deterred from these blackguard vaporings by the Chin Foo Folk, Ki Ha, Hun Ha, He Ho, Ching Chong Chang Jing, and any other representatives of Asia's almond-eyed lepers. Hey, I dare you to debate me again in public. You blackguard. Oh, you're too chicken, eh? Shut up, you moon-eyed leper. Well, let's have a duel then. Choose your weapons. Chinese chopsticks, Irish potatoes, or Krupp guns. The audience hissed, but we made our point. And Carney has faded into obscurity. What would happen if more of us, all of you, did this whenever a politician or a demagogue spews lies about us? We would gain more respect. We would be listened to. It may not happen right away, but eventually they'll get the point. We must shame them until they do as we tell them. Remember, it was our lawmakers who gave bigots their license to do this. Congress passed the Chinese Exclusion Act on May 6, 1882. that enshrined hate speech into American